You may wonder what will happen to the evidence in the Jackson bribery scheme following the guilty pleas of Chokwe Antar Lumumba, Aaron Banks, and Jody Owens. U.S. Attorney Baxter Kruger says he couldn't speak to when the evidence in the case would be made public, saying that's a decision that will, quote, happen later. He noted a lot of evidence was already unsealed. That included a 40-page indictment. And law professor Matt Steffi told 3 on Your Side any evidence collected remains in the hands of the prosecutors or defense attorneys. Defense counsel is required to return any discovery materials it received to the United States or certify that all materials are destroyed or deleted. Sentencing in that case is October 15th.